Okay, as I mentioned, just to briefly introduce myself to you, I'm going to be your host today. My name is Barry Braster. I work with Etteplan. I've been with the company, actually formerly known as Tito Press, for 13 years. Then 2 years ago, we became part of the Etteplan family. My background, you can read that here, but from the STE side, I've in the past 14 years or so, I've managed a number of Simplified English implementations. But my main role at Etteplan is the sales director for our technical documentation unit. So, a little bit about Etteplan for those of you who are familiar with Tito Press but are not yet familiar with Etteplan. We are specializing in industrial equipment engineering and technical documentation solutions and services as part of that. There's about 1,800 people working for Etteplan worldwide. About 400 of those are specialists in the technical documentation service area, and that means that the other 1,400 work in engineering. 45 offices at the moment and growing. Headquarters are in Finland, but we have offices in Sweden, the Netherlands, Denmark, the United States. We're based in Austin, Texas, and we have currently 3 offices in China, in the Shanghai area. We're a publicly listed company. You can find our shares at the NASDAQ in Helsinki. Our fields of expertise, very briefly, but we do, on the documentation side, we do basically full product lifecycle management. Whether you require any form of technical documentation, require any help there, either in the form of outsourcing some or if not all of the parts of technical documentation, translations, content management. We also have people that can help you and assist you with your content strategies. It's basically the whole A to Z, and whichever particular service or product that you may need. We can even help you implement systems. Anything in the field of technical documentation is something that we can help you out with. And then, of course, as I mentioned, engineering as well. This is pretty important for the webinar to briefly touch upon because the main reason is S1000D and ATA ISpec 2200, as you probably know, are aerospace and defense standards, but a lot of these companies that you can see on the top left are aerospace and defense, but we also work for a lot of companies outside of aerospace and defense where we actually use specifications like S1000D and Simplified English, which origins from aerospace and defense, to also implement in other industries. So we've done that quite successfully over the last decade or so. So that's just to not only mention the large variety of companies that we work with and for, but also that from an implementation point of view, aerospace and defense has a lot of these standards coming from aerospace and defense usually are used as a basis for implementations outside of those industries as well. Okay, so today's webinar topic, Simplified English as part of an S1000D or ATA ISpec 2200 implementation. What does it mean? What does it entail? It's something that I'm going to be talking to you about. For those of you who aren't familiar with S1000D, it's an international specification. It's been around for over 3 decades, designed to cover tech pub activities in support of any platform. It used to be only air, but then it got extended to sea and land vehicles as well. Currently, it's at issue 4.1. You can actually download a free copy at s1000d.org. It's maintained not only by ASD, which is the European Association for Aerospace and Defense Industries, but also by AIA and ATA in the United States. Current issue 4.1 has over 3,500 pages. If you have enough time to read through it, it's a very thick specification, but then again, it's very important, and there's a lot of information that goes into maintaining these large platforms, so a lot of information is needed there, of course. Currently, companies like Airbus, Boeing, Mitsubishi, Comac, and Irkut and other OEMs have selected S1000D as the specification to be used for the delivery of technical publications for future aircraft deliveries. This is just aircraft, but there's of course land vehicles, there's sea equipment that also, some of these also have an S1000D requirement. For those outside of aerospace and defense, it might be good for you to know that industries like offshore and marine, railways are looking at S1000D as a basis for their own purposes, and resulting in specs like ship decks for the offshore and energy and maritime industries, and the railway industry is calling it rail decks. So this is definitely something that is being used more and more worldwide. S1000D, as you may know, is for structuring information so that data is much easier to exchange. But of course, the idea of content is that it's going to be easily used, reused, easier to manage, faster to make information retrievable by end users, and it allows you to only adapt single sourcing, meaning that you are able to change the source once and then reuse it for multiple publication formats. Currently, it's still mostly in the good old PDF format, but in case you need to be able to publish it interactively, for instance, in the form of an item, then that's something that you can do as well. An item is an interactive electronic technical manual, basically meaning if you want to be able to find and work with documentation, information for maintenance interactively on an iPad, then you can do so by going through S1000D. On the other hand, we have ATA ISpec 2200, which is pretty much the equivalent of S1000D for aviation maintenance, so more on the commercial side, where S1000D has its root in defense. It's a recommended set of specifications for content, structure, and deliverables to meet the requirements of aircraft technical information. There's a number of objectives here, and that's of course to minimize the cost, minimize the effort expended by operators and manufacturers, to improve the information quality and timeliness, and then of course to ensure that manufacturers provide data that meets the airline operational needs. The idea of in the future is that ATA ISpec 2200 and S1000D, I believe as it currently stands, as I was informed, is that both specifications are going to exist next to each other, but there's going to be some integration between both of these specs, S1000D and ATA ISpec 2200. Of course, it is necessary for you to look at your contracts and see if there actually is an S1000D or an ATA ISpec 2200 requirement. And if there is, of course, you need to see which version you have to adhere to. But that actually immediately gives the link to Simplified Technical English version, in this case the latest S1000D 4.1 refers to Simplified English being used as part of S1000D. So if you do have an S1000D or an ATA ISpec 2200 requirement, you need to look at that contract and make sure and verify if there is a Simplified Technical English requirement. And if there is, then of course there's a couple of things that that you need to take care of, and that's what I'll be discussing with you today. Because if there is such a requirement, not only for S1000D or the ATA spec or Simplified English, what does that in first instance mean to you? Well, number one is the inability to deliver the required technical documentation. You know, if you want to be a supplier, you need to be able to provide this type of documentation in this particular way. If not, then the preference will be given to your competitors. So you may not be qualifying for future tender opportunities, and you may even lose your supplier status. With compliant data delivery, you can then further optimize the delivery of your tech pubs, maintain compliance as a supplier, which can automatically access new industries. It will open doors to new opportunities, but even to other industries. And then once you have everything in order, you'll be the first to market. So that is just from a generic point of view. Specifically looking at Simplified English, however, what is it? Well, it's an official specification. Like S1000D, it's governed by ASD, which is the European Association for Aerospace and Defense Industries, which actually they work together with companies around the world. It's actually not so much a European specification, it's a really global specification. Companies like Boeing are part of the Simplified English Maintenance Group and have been since the mid-80s when this publication was first issued. We are currently at issue number 6. This spec is also free to download at asd.ste100.org. I say free to download, we actually have to request the spec. You can do so for free at that particular website. The idea, however, of Simplified English, or STE, is that it makes, and that's really the first and foremost goal of it, is to make technical English easy to understand. So it's not there to make your life difficult. I mean, it's the same as getting into a car, having to put a seatbelt on. That thing is not there to make life difficult for you. It is there for safety. Well, that's what STE does as well. How does it do that? By applying some writing rules that really are all aimed at keeping things simple, to be specific and to be consistent, not to overcomplicate things. You know, if you want to be specific, if you want to tell someone not to stack boxes too high, well, what is high? Is it 10 boxes? Is it 20 boxes? If some of these crates are, for instance, 200 pounds apiece, well, you may want to tell your end user. So you need to be, you know, specific. If you tell someone the pressure, make sure that the pressure is okay. If you're going to tell someone that in, for instance, in Asian countries, then for them it may mean something completely different than, for instance, here in the US. So we need to standardize on terms in addition to that, and that means that one word can only have one meaning. If you're going to say switch, you know, set the switch to off, the light switch, for instance, then you could not use it as a verb. So one word can only have one meaning, and it can only be one part of speech. You cannot switch off the switch, for instance. You cannot place the place. You cannot cover the cover. And if you do that, it can cause confusion. And it all basically has its origin in words originating as a technical noun and then being verbalized at some point in time. We're very good at that. The word Google would be a perfect example for that. You know, everyone is Googling names in order to find information. While Google is actually not a verb, it's a great marketing term, of course, but should not be used in technical communication as a verb. There's a core dictionary. It comes with the spec, has about 3,000 words in them. But if you realize that there's about 60,000 words that we use on an average day-to-day basis in communication, in technical documentation, then you can maybe see it's necessary to specify company-specific words as well and make sure that they're either approved or not approved. What does Simplified English address? Well, safety, I mentioned, of course. Information in the last couple of decades is becoming more and more complex. The volumes of maintenance information is growing. We are marketing ourselves globally, of course, so we have service centers that are geographically separated. We are having to communicate highly technical information to mostly non-native English speakers, or maybe even inexperienced maintenance personnel who may have various levels of technical skills. There could be risk of misunderstandings, there could be liability issues, shorter response times may be required. As a matter of fact, they are required specifically for aircraft. If there's any maintenance issue and you're waiting at the gate for that issue to get solved, the airline is losing a lot of money, and they cannot deal with that. So in other words, they have to get it up and going, up and running, and I would say up and flying, of course, in this case, facilitate that shorter response time. There was actually a statement by the Civil Aviation Association that mentioned that the standardization of language used by maintenance personnel has increased because of practices in the past 20 years, and they include the expansion of the role of computers in a maintenance environment. So we're getting more from paper into an iPad or a tablet environment. There's fewer translations required from English to a native language. increased use of manufacturer-generated standardized training material that are then usually being given in English. More alliances amongst airlines. There's merger after merger taking place, but many of them are in countries that have no, not even English as a common language or no common language whatsoever. And then, of course, we're going into really an increasingly mobile, multicultural workforce. We have to realize that as an author, we may have a different technical language and or cultural background, and we have to write for an end user, an audience that may also have a different language, cultural, or technical background. And if we have to meet each other in the middle, and we use English as the main language, and we have to communicate very highly technical English, then we better make sure that people understand what we're trying to say. But English actually is more complex than you think. The English language itself, believe it or not, has over 1 million words. But according to the Oxford Dictionary, these words like set, run, go, take, and stand, 500 words used, most have an average of 23 different meanings. Well, and these words that are mentioned here, each of them have over 334 different definitions, believe it or not. And then these are not the most difficult words. So how can we make sure that our end users understand us and that they don't misunderstand us, and while we're trying to tell them something in a maintenance procedure, how can we make sure that they understand us the correct way? This is an example that I always use for those who have seen my webinars before, but a sentence like turn off engines not required, I ran into many years ago on a maintenance in a maintenance manual. The problem with this sentence is, first and foremost, it's a good English sentence. Really, it is. Nothing really wrong with it. However, the problem is, and that's actually the problem because it's a good English sentence, so you would notice it. But the actual problem underlying is that it can mean two different things. It could mean turn off the engines that are not required. But it can also mean that turning off the engines is not required at all. Kind of how you read it. So from a dramatic point of view, not to go too much into linguistics, but you can say turn off engines not required instead of turn off the engines that are not required. And if you have 4 engines in front of you, this could mean two different things, of course. So couple of examples. These are examples. I'm not going to, because it's a lot of text to ask you to read through all of them, but these are some examples on given by the Aviation Institute of Maintenance on how the worst maintenance fails could have been prevented. And these are some examples where the reporting in the end showed, for instance, in the first case, the mechanical problems were caused by failed maintenance. As a matter of fact, all of these were caused by maintenance that wasn't done the right way. And then, of course, the question is, why were they done? Why were they not done the right way? Did the documentation have anything to do with it? In the case of these instances, it did. Power transformer company was sued over $5 million because badly worded and confusing documentation. Largest single problem area for Google is translation issues. It's actually 35% of all reported issues. If we go a little bit further down, a major airline had to ground their fleet of MD-80s due to ambiguity in the documentation. And with documentation, you actually mean maintenance cards. So there was something incorrect on the maintenance card. And again, we go back to that one sentence, turn off engines not required. Something so small can have two very different meanings. And if we're talking about manuals that sometimes can contain over thousands and thousands of pages, and this is just one tiny little sentence in there, how can we make sure that our end users are understanding us when we're trying to tell them something? Something very crucial. So something very small can have very big consequences. So the question that we really have to ask ourselves is if we communicate clearly and efficiently. The question, for instance, is, do we do terminology management? And if we do terminology management, how can we ensure that we only that we standardize on words? In other words, are the one words that we use, do they actually have different meanings? So are we using a vocabulary that have one word that has several meanings, or maybe we are using several words that all have the same meaning? And if that is the case, that can cause confusion. Is there a style guide? Do you measure the quality of your content, and how do you measure it? In other words, are we efficient and cost-effective information developers? So not just writing because there is a requirement to provide a manual with our product, but are we actually doing it the right way? You know, and then I go back to the picture that you're looking at here, go back to something that I mentioned before. Are we, you know, as an author writing for an audience that may have a different language, cultural, or technical background? And, you know, are we writing for that type of audience, knowing that we also ourselves have a different language, technical, or cultural background? But from a IT point of view, and I mention this because it's important, if you have an S1000D requirement or an ATA ISpec 2200 requirement, and you're working, let's say in the case of S1000D, in a common source database, a CSDB, or in a content management system, CMS, then, you know, if you have that sentence, turn off the engines that are not required, which is now clear, well, that is something that you want to have going into your CMS in order to publish information to your end user, and not all the other sentences. There's 100, if not 1,000 different ways of saying the exact same thing, but does it actually mean the same? Is a completely different question. Your end user is not going to be bothered by what you put in your content management system. Those are, of course, costs, that's, of course, information that you need to manage properly, of course, because that is a cost to your organization. But your end user is not going to care. He or she is only going to see that PDF or that item that they're going to read and learn and work with, whether it's in the form of training or PDF files or, you know, information on an iPad. That is something that they're going to work with, and not even knowing or realizing there's a whole content management system behind that. So information from that point of view also will facilitate the use of a CMS and publishing it in various formats, because it's actually simple and clear and easy to understand by your end user. What does it entail? Simplified English. There's really 3 steps to follow here. And they're mandatory. Whether you do them yourself, whether you outsource them to a company like ourselves, it's something that you're going to have to do. It's very important that you train your writers. It's very important that you standardize on your terms. And it's very important, the last part, but the first 2 are very crucial, that you add software, but do it the right way, not just by software and have it done the work, have it do the work for you. It's really the combination of these 3 steps that will give you the most satisfactory results. Start with the training. Most crucial part. People need to understand why it is necessary to create clarity. Because what is clear to the writer or the engineer may not be clear at all for the end user. So it's important that people not only understand how they need to write in Simplified English, but maybe even more important on why they need to do so. If you say things a certain way, you know, for instance, we gave a training a couple of years ago, and the manual stated to clear the 3rd dome chassis window securing screw threaded holes. Now, to the engineer, this was crystal clear. I'm mentioning it to you. I'll say it again. Clear the 3rd dome chassis window securing screw threaded holes. Was not clear at all, of course, which part of the word belonged to what. And this, of course, is a very small part of a very large machine. Well, the smaller the part, the larger the machine, the longer the sentence. And it was not clear whatsoever, let alone you had to translate a sentence like that. So it's very important that you go through this. It's a 2 to 3 day training course, usually takes about 2 days. First day talking about the theory about things, but second day is a workshop that we would give, working with hands-on material and seeing how this can be misinterpreted by end users. One example that we always use is the use of gerunds, for instance, the ing word like removing, for instance, or doing. Not recommended, because if I give you the example, for instance, the woman hits the man using a hammer, then it's not really clear who is holding the hammer. It could be the man, but it could also be the woman. So, and if it's not clear who is doing what to whom, in this case, then you cannot use the gerund. because you need to be, for instance, in procedural text for maintenance procedure, you need to be very clear who is doing what. Otherwise, it will cause confusion with all sorts of consequences. Standardizing on corporate terminology then is terminology management. The idea is that one word can only have one meaning and one part of speech, as I mentioned. The idea is that you do some data or text mining of a cross-section of your documentation. You extract all the terms and then you analyze them in order to find out which words should be approved and which should be not approved. There's a linguistic and statistical analysis that are part of that, something that we can definitely help you out with. Briefly mention HyperSte. It's the tool that we've been using for the last 15 years ourselves, so that means that our 400 authors work with HyperSte on a day-to-day basis for a number of clients who have outsourced their documentation to us. It's available in 3 different editions. The ASD S1000D edition for aerospace and defense companies who have that requirement, and then controlled language for outside aerospace and defense if you need a little bit more flexibility, and the basic version is there for those who would like to use this as part of just to check terminology, for instance. It's there to as a plugin for a number of authoring tools, Word, FrameMaker, Arbitext, and well, you can see them all here. What does it do? What does it mean to you? Well, it's number one, safety, of course. That's really the most important aspect of the moment. That's the whole reason why it came about. If you believe that in the 80s, someone at Airbus, or as they were known at the time, Aerospatiale, electrocuted himself because the manual stated he needed to cut the power, and we can all maybe agree that was maybe a silly but deadly mistake of that person. But if you also realize that cut the power, there's so many different ways of saying that. There's cut the power, there's shut off, shut down, remove the power, kill the process, one of my favorites. There's many different ways to say that, and that can cause confusion because removing the power really could mean different things. If I throw my laptop out of the window right now, I will have removed the power. Yes, but maybe I've done a little bit more than that, and glad not to do so because, of course, it would have been a very short and abrupt end of this webinar. It's a compliance issue, yes, but it will also, the use of STE100 will also facilitate the use of S1000D and ATA ISpec 2200. So it will make a standardized, it will turn into a standardized way of writing. Your authors will become more efficient. It will help you meet your delivery deadlines. Why? Because during the training, we not only focus on how to create clarity, we also focus on the need to know versus the nice to know. And on average, that has resulted in 40% less text that was needed if we compare how it was written afterwards. If it's easier to understand, easier to use, then it will improve your user experience. It can help to save and prevent costs, specifically or generally on documentation, specifically if you do have a translation requirement, because it's much faster, better, and cheaper to translate. So before and after examples on the left and on the right. I'm not going to ask you to read it because the letters are quite small, but we were able to reduce the content by 35% for this particular manual. Much clearer instructions, much clearer structure as well, thanks to, in this case, S1000D. I'll show you another before and after example, and not only will I use text here on the left-hand side, but I'll also use photos on the right-hand side for this particular procedure to replace a motor. Left is a procedure as you can expect, but we simplified it a little bit more. On the right-hand side is the use of photos. See, the problem with photos is, what the good thing is they're very quick and easy to take. The problem is if you want to reuse them later on and something changes in the in this case the motor, or the 6-hopper become the 5-hopper, for instance, or the 4-hopper, then you're going to have to retake all of those pictures. Another problem is if you're going to print this on a PDF, give it to your end users, or publish on PDF, give it to your end users who are then going to print it on black and white, then half of the information is going to be gone. So where we used to go with picture says more than 1,000 words, that picture now says nothing anymore. And of course all the text is referring to the picture, and you might as well just throw away your manual. So it's not very good practice anymore. Giving you the after example, very clear, very short, easy and fast to read sentences. We're much more reusing the words as well, and using simplified illustrations in this case. And what simplified illustrations means is that it's a particular methodology that we use is based on XVL and SVG files, but we take the 3D, we strip unnecessary information, and then we use two color layouts so that in addition to a 2.5D view, so that it communicates information very clearly to the end user, focuses on the information that he or she needs to know during, in this case, the motor replacement procedure. I'll give you a very short demonstration on how things would work, and where I would like to address the question of how to deal with legacy data. And then, so we have another 10 minutes or so, so we're quite good. If I show you this Arbitext example right here, so there's some text here. Now with HyperSte, you can check this particular document and get some feedback, of course. And we do that in the form of colors. And in this case, if I click on subassembly, I'm being told that subassembly needs to have hyphen in between. Removing is not allowed because it's a gerund. So it's easy to use the tool that way. On the right hand side we're being given an information window that I can simply say, okay, well, subassembly replace everything. And on the bottom we have a very nice feature in HyperSte that shows us how to not only use good sentences with a high compliancy rating, that's what CR stands for, but it also shows to what extent sentences are being reused. So whenever I am rewriting this sentence, I'm allowing one of my co-authors to reuse my sentence for future use. And it's kind of like a content management system within a content management system. You don't even need a content management system for that matter to use this particular feature, but it's very powerful and it can help you really in the end reuse each other's sentences, which will in the end help you to save quite a bit of time on the authoring. Now, dealing with legacy data, what I first did on this particular file is I created a report. You can create a report that in this case shows you a compliance rating of a little over 33%. It shows us that these words, it shows the pie chart where the big problem areas are. It gives us other readings as well. So for those in the defense industry that may have different requirements for flash Kincaid grade, for instance, a certain school grade level reading, then it's something that can be measured. You can also measure translatability, similarity, etc., etc. On the right hand side we're being given a pie chart that tells us exactly what the big problem areas are. In this case we see that there's a lot of non-approved words. So if I want to go to the detailed results, we see that this particular sample gives us compliance ratings for different categories: terminology and spelling, grammar, length, and style and structure. Easily categorized here, and in a drop-down I can see immediately going to the non-approved words. I can put them in an alphabetical order. I can also put them in a frequency order, and I see that the word removing was used 39 times. Now there's not so much wrong with use removing here, but if you're saying disconnect each spring block by removing screws, it's actually better to say remove the screws to disconnect each spring block. It's telling people things in the correct order, what they need to do, when they need to do, and it's making them responsible for their actions. We go and see that there's quite a bit of words not found in the dictionary, and it's very easy to actually update using it's another tool called the DMT, the Dictionary Maintenance Tool. I can briefly start that up just to show you the user interface of that. I'll just open up a dictionary here, and in this case you are very easily able to update and work with the dictionary. In case you would like to have a separate demo just for yourselves and your team, then feel free to contact me afterwards. But more about that in a moment. So this is a way of really finding the big issues, the big problem areas within legacy data. The idea then is to go into HyperSte, go to the settings. By the way, we allow you to work with various dictionaries. There's the ASD dictionary. That's the primary dictionary. The secondary dictionary is always going to be the company-specific dictionary, so that it can overwrite the primary dictionary when it needs to do so. But whenever the ASD dictionary gets updated, we're able to then simply provide you with the latest version as part of the annual maintenance. And then there's also a project dictionary that you have, that it's an optional to use, that you may or may not want to use in case you have different clients or different projects or different divisions that require their own terms, for instance, as an example. The rules you are able to completely build and customize for your own particular purposes. And then the idea with legacy data is that you can build profiles that deal with it. So the profiles can, for instance, in case you find that you're doing very good with terminology, as an administrator, you can unflag the terminology rules, go to profile assignment, and then save that particular profile, for instance, as a phase 1 profile. You can create profiles for marketing, for legal, documentation, whatever your heart desires, and then really create customized profiling for your particular purposes. And in the case of legacy data, you are able to create a profile that would only deal with the biggest problem areas, and that will really increase your compliance rating dramatically in the shortest amount of time, in case there is a deadline that you need to make. And it allows for a very efficient conversion of legacy data into Simplified English. It's very customizable. So in here I have an S1000D DTD loaded. If I, for instance, go to warning, then we can see that there's a tag that a warning or a caution can actually be, and that's one of the rules of S1000D, for instance, that certain procedural rules or certain text need to have procedural text in there. Well, now you can actually check if actually indeed contains procedural text. So it's very customizable in that regard. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea of how HyperSte can help, of course, together with a customized dictionary, together with the training to help you comply with Simplified English, which then at the same time, if this is being saved into the content management system or the CSDB, whichever acronym you want to use here, then it's going to facilitate that process quite easily. Okay, briefly a report afterwards. By just adding the dictionary files to this particular report, we were able to jump, and by applying some of the legacy data rules, we were able to jump from 33% up to a little less than 78%. The measurement where you really want to be aiming for usually is about 90%. It's actually impossible to get 100% because some of the writing rules within STE 100 are tips and guides rather than being hard rules on complying yes or no. For instance, try to use the limit of future tense, for instance, because you want things to happen in the present and not in the future or the past, for that matter, specifically in procedural text. So, okay, so that part, I'm going to then jump back to the slides. I'm almost done here, and then we can open up for Q&A. The survey results that we've done for companies that we've implemented Simplified English with HyperSte, but also provided training and dictionary building, was that 30% were saved on translation and localization. There was an average of 40% in reduced word count. Quality went up in case of, and I'll discuss it in a moment, but for one of our customers, Rolls-Royce, who had a ASD ST100 requirement, they were able to reduce their product cycle time by 30% because the software would automate a lot of the checking for them. There was a 40% reduction in overall documentation costs, and I mentioned just now already, there was a very efficient conversion for legacy data. Couple of case studies here. Rolls-Royce, and these are Rolls-Royce numbers that we're looking at here. For writers, it meant that there was an 81% reduction of grammar errors, 90% reduction in simplified English errors that were found, 52% reduction in time to find the errors because of the automation part I just mentioned. And for QA, it really helped them save their labor costs. Rather than having 5 people doing the QA on their documents, they were able to bring it down to 1 person just using software. Approximately 48% reduction in time to review, and approximately 25% increase in grammatical and simplified English errors found in the documents. For American Airlines, so on the commercial side, we were able to train the authors and engineers on simplified English authoring. The main reason was that we needed to improve clarity for their maintenance cards, and that was achieved. I'll mention one outside aerospace and defense. For Electa, which is they're in the sophisticated equipment that finds and attacks cancer cells in the human body. They were able to, like a particular manual in this case would be about 1,500 pages on average. They were able to reduce their print cost per manual quite heavily. They had a 30% page count reduction, 20% word count reduction, and were able to get higher user experience and found information to be easily managed, accessed, integrate, and reuse. Before going to the QA, we offer free content reality checks, which basically means is that you can email us, send us some sample content in case you are interested in seeing to what extent it can be improved, to see to what extent it can solve the issues that you may have. It's something that we do at no cost. Simply email me, barry.braster@etaplan.com. For more information, also visit simplifiedenglish.com. For more information on technical documentation services, you can visit titapress.com, 1S. And for more information about Etaplan as a company, including engineering services, visit us at etaplan.com. Now I'm going to open up the Q&A sessions. Quite a few of you already answered or asked some questions, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up here. First question by Gloria is, does this apply to computer manufacturing technical documentation? I'm assuming you mean, because this question came in quite early, computer manufacturing, it depends, Gloria. You need to see if, I mean, usually it's documentation that belongs to equipment that is delivered as part of a contract. That documentation needs to be in S1000D. If that means that computer documentation, computer manufacturing documentation is part of that, then yes, it would potentially mean that you may have a requirement. But really you need to have a look at the contract and see what that states for you. Michelle is then asking, management once pops out quickly, style guide need to be read, not just written. Oh, okay, well that's not really a question, but you assume agree with what we said here. Donna then comes with that statement that structured authoring is often a big cultural change. I'm just reading it out here, Donna. Many traditional tech pub groups are book-based. Does your training deal with how to approach necessary cultural changes when moving to structured authoring? And can you give an example how you address cultural change? Yes, it does. When we address cultural change, it's very much, before we give a training, we really focus on, we ask questions. So we have you fill out a questionnaire. We ask you a bunch of questions face to face. What it is that you're trying to achieve, what your big problem areas are, what your bottlenecks are, and we somewhat customize the training on that. So for instance, if you have end users that are based in Asia, or if you have a translation requirement for Asian languages, for instance, or for Southern European languages, then we can focus on what English will do if you translate them into those particular languages. For instance, from a cultural point of view, the example that I always use is the word should. There is should, would, could, may, or might. Any of those words used in the Asian culture could potentially mean that you give people, from a cultural point of view, you give them a choice. So if you say you should switch off the manual, or I'm sorry, you should switch off the power, then people can interpret that as, oh, I have a choice. I can either do it or I could not do it. And if you're going to translate that into an Asian language, then your proofreader is going to say, hey, the translation is great, but does it actually have the correct meaning? And that's not something that a proofreader is ever able to find because he's not a subject matter expert. So that's something that is very important that you achieve, that you need to achieve. Pablo then asks if there is a Technical English S1000D course that we offer. We offer Technical English courses for S1000D. We work with partners. We're able to do this ourselves, but we, depending on which country you are located in, we can definitely help you out there. Simply email me at barry.braster@theplan.com. Gloria is asking if we can provide more details on what we mean by contract for this standard. Let's say that in the case of S1000D, a country purchases an airplane. Now, let's say that KLM purchases the Boeing 787. Then they may require that that's always done in consensus, of course, with the supplier, what this means for the documentation. And it could mean that in this case Boeing, who already have a requirement for that, is going to make sure that all the suppliers to the Boeing 787 need to adhere to S1000D. So those who make the air conditioning systems, those who do the chairs, those who do the landing gear, etc., etc. There could sometimes be over hundreds of different suppliers. But of course, if you are an end user, if you are a maintenance guy, and you have to go to an aircraft and you have to do maintenance on it, you don't want to go there with 4 different manuals from 4 different suppliers. That information needs to be very easily exchanged. And that's why all these manufacturers have to use the same particular standard, because it makes it much easier to exchange that information. And only then he is able to do his work fast and quickly, which of course can save a lot of cost. So that's kind of how that would work. So yes, you need to look at the agreement, the technical agreement that you have with your clients, and see if there's any particular requirement in there for technical documentation. Robert is asking where he can get a copy of the ISpec 2200 and ASD ST100. Well, for ASD ST100, you go to asd-ste100.org. You can request a free copy. For the ATA ISpec, you simply just Google ATA ISpec 2200. You see, now I'm using Google as a verb myself. I shouldn't really be doing that, but hopefully most of you understand me. But that's something that you need to purchase, that particular standard. So I believe those were all of the questions that came in. So we are a little bit over time, I can see. I want to thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope I didn't speak too fast here for you. If I did, then maybe you can watch the recording again. Please request it. Again, information here to contact me is barry.braster@theplan.com. Any questions or concerns that you may have, feel free to ask me. And then for now, thank you very much for attending this webinar. We'll be in touch, and wishing you all a great day wherever you may be in this beautiful world. Thank you. Bye-bye.